Hello and welcome back to the Edison Awards Meet the Innovators 2021 Earth Day edition, live from the beautiful, spectacular, solar-powered Babcock Ranch here in Southwest Florida, not far from Fort Myers. We're glad you're with us on the live stream, and we're glad you're here with us in person. It's nice to see other human beings in person. Remember that? What that was like? Mostly we've been getting torsos for the past year or so. You know, here we are on this Earth Day, and it's so nice to see all of these commitments by various countries, including our own, thank you very much, to reduce climate change greenhouse gas emissions in the coming years. One of the hardest challenges faced by anybody reckoning with this problem is aviation. Pound for pound, aviation fuel has 16 times more energy than the best batteries we have right now. And pounds really count in aviation. And so while we look maybe toward some alternative down the road, electric airplanes or hydrogen airplanes or some other alternative, there's actually some short-term ideas which are just part of a bucket of huge ideas which are at the center of our Achievement Award winners portfolio. So before we introduce her, let's take a look, and you will meet, at least on tape before live, Jennifer Holmgren.
I've always been very focused on energy democracy and wanting to make sure everybody had access to energy.
Jennifer Holmgren was born in Colombia. 10 years ago, she read an article that warned unchecked climate change would render her country unfit to produce coffee beans. She knew it was time we all woke up and smelled her country's famous crop.
It isn't about sea level rise, it's about a fundamental change to our ecosystem, to our way of life. And so I realized that I had to contribute to that I had to try to do something about it.
A chemist with an MBA, she spent many years in the oil refining business. About the time she was having her coffee crisis, a startup in New Zealand called Lanzatech captured her attention by the way it was capturing carbon dioxide and recycling it. Biologist Sean Simpson is the co-founder.
Everybody at the time was really looking at the use of woody biomass as a resource from which to produce fuels and chemicals. It struck me as being very hard from an economic perspective. And as biologists, we thought of biological ways of converting gases, and that led us to the idea behind Lanzatech, which is using specialized microbes that eat gases, greenhouse gases, to produce fuels and chemicals.
Simpson was looking for a CEO, so Holmgren got on a plane.
So take us back to that first meeting with Sean and what captured your imagination.
It wasn't just a biology experiment, it was actually also engineering thinking on how to scale up the technology. And for that reason, I knew that this was scalable in a way that could have a material impact on our carbon problem.
She took the job and 4 years later moved the company to Skokie, Illinois. Today they have a commercial plant operating in China and 2 more on the way. And there are 2 others under construction in India and Belgium. Working with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, some of the ethanol they produce from waste carbon dioxide becomes jet fuel. In 2018, a Virgin Atlantic 747 carrying 200 passengers flew from Orlando to London on Lanzatech jet fuel, recycled from a smokestack at a steel mill. Virgin Chairman Richard Branson is one of Lanzatech's biggest fans.
It's extraordinary how brave they've been. It's extraordinary that they've managed to keep the funding coming in, and it's extraordinary that they've managed to get to where they've got. And hopefully all the hard work they've put in over the last 16 to 18 years will now come to fruition.
Jennifer Holmgren and Lanzatech are not stopping at jet fuel. They say the carbon they recycle can be used to make all kinds of fuels and products that rely one way or another on CO2.
Thomas Edison, if he were alive today, I suspect he'd be very interested in this. His approach to innovation seems to match a lot of the way you're thinking about things.
You use the right word, Miles, innovation. It's not invention and it's not engineering. It's innovation. It's doing something differently that solves a problem, that creates a solution, that can matter and scale.
He said, I never failed. I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work.
I actually don't think of mistakes as mistakes. I just move on. You just have to dig deeper. Every time something goes wrong, you have to dig deeper to find a solution.
What do you say to the next generation of inventors and innovators?
Go for it. Go for it hard. Go for it big. Don't give up. If something stands in your way, find another way around it and just keep going.
Go for it hard, and just keep going. I'd like to put that on a plaque on my wall, Jennifer Holmgren. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Give her a round of applause on your achievement. So I'm curious, you were working in the oil refining business. And I imagine when you were at the meetings and you said, hey, I've got this great idea for capturing the carbon, making fuel, that might not have been a very popular idea in the boardroom. It doesn't seem to help the bottom line. How did it go initially? And put the mic up close to your face. Okay, yeah.
How did it go initially?
Yeah.
It's a tough road, right? I mean, at the end of the day, building credibility for something completely different, especially in a sector that's 120 years old and everybody knows exactly how to do things the way they should be done, it's tough to propose other solutions. But at the end of the day, you just find one yes, you get then a second yes, and then you get a third, and you keep building on that.
But so you were innovating kind of from the inside out, working for a big company in the innovation, Honeywell, UOP, which is big in that business. And most times innovations come from outside in. Was that an advantage or a disadvantage or just different?
Well, okay, so let's take a step back, right? Because this carbon capture approach that Sean came up with is something that's outside of what was my UOP life, right? At UOP, what I was doing is trying to use vegetable oils, use cooking oils, and things like that. I think people underestimate entrepreneurship. People underestimate how many ideas come up. And one of the things I did at UOP is I had the opportunity to manage basically the exploratory portfolio. And so that's what I did. One of my key jobs was to fund all the new ideas. And then we got excited, well, I got excited about renewable fuels, and then we built a business around that. But no, lots of great ideas bubble from the inside. It's just making sure they see the light of day.
Yeah, you had to be pretty persistent, I imagine, in that case. And one of the key insights, and by the way, if you want to participate in this conversation, you have a question for Jennifer, you go to slido.com, #MTI, and I'll try to work that question in, and we'll save a couple minutes at the end for questions from the audience as well. So the key insight that you had, though, was that there's really not enough French fry friolators in the world to power our economy, right? And so you have to think a little bigger, like orders of magnitude bigger.
Absolutely.
And so this idea, when you heard about an idea, a guy who's turning the waste from a smokestack into feedstock, that's a moment, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, the world uses 100 million barrels a day of petroleum, okay? 100 million barrels a day. And there just isn't enough traditional biological feedstock. And so when I heard about using carbon monoxide, hydrogen and carbon dioxide, this is everywhere. Smokestacks, gasified solids, like your trash can be gasified and converted, and it's the same fundamental technology. And so that's what I also really liked about it. It's a platform. Different inputs, different outputs, customizable, but it's the fundamental core, which means when you devote resources to building that core, it's so fungible that you know you're going to create a lot of value.
So value is an important word here.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide is not viewed as something of value. It's waste, right? It's a problem. You're flipping this on its head. Tell us, explain how carbon can become something of value, an asset, something that people would want to recover.
Yeah, absolutely. So we like to think of
waste carbon as an opportunity, not a liability. And we do believe it has value. Carbon, this is the problem we have in this economy. We don't value carbon. We just throw it away, constantly throw it away. That's not the right answer. Carbon does have value. Every carbon atom needs to be thought of as precious, kind of like, you know, diamonds, right? That's not the only carbon that's precious. Everything is precious. We cannot afford to waste carbon, and we certainly can't afford to dump it into our atmosphere or our oceans.
So how much of this, I mean, you already have commercial plants that are running. How does that business model work now? And to what extent do you need, one way or another, a price on carbon to make it really work, you know, writ large?
Yeah. So right now, the way it really works is that we make ethanol, and in many parts of the world, ethanol is subsidized, right? So we benefit from that, and that means the price of ethanol can be a little higher, artificially higher. And so what that enables us to do is take advantage of that. A price on carbon will allow us to work everywhere. And I get asked a lot, you know, well, you don't need a price of carbon, you don't need any incentives. And the answer is we do. We're competing with a 120-year-old industry that's optimized, really optimized.
And heavily subsidized
and
as well.
That's true, that's true. Even if I ignore that, though, it's, you know,
right.
And look at solar, right? I mean, there was a time when you were spending 20, 30,000 times what you're spending now per kilowatt, right? And then once you start implementing a technology, once you get it to scale, you start driving it down the cost curve, and you put more of them out there, and they go even further down the cost curve. This is something that we need to harness. We need to understand that we incentivize at the beginning, and then actually you can reduce the incentives because the technology itself will get cheaper and cheaper.
So when I was talking to Richard Branson about this, I said, what do you think about, you know, a carbon tax or whatever? He said, I don't like taxes. He said, but I would love to force companies that are involved in producing greenhouse gas emissions, force them to invest in companies that are working on green alternatives, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. It just eliminates the middleman, essentially. But in other words, it's not going in the pockets of the government along the way. Is that a practical idea, do you think?
Actually, in some ways, that is actually a really important idea. And the reason for that is we say we're crossing the valley of death, right? You're scaling. You're building pilots, demos, commercial units, and each of them are more and more expensive, and you got to raise the cash. The first one you build is always extremely expensive.
Oh, sorry about that. Keep going.
Extremely expensive because what happens is you have to risk adjust the investment, right? And if it's the first time you build something of a certain size, you know, it turns into something that is hard to justify on an economic basis. So incentives or grants that help you cross the valley of death, that help you build the first one, are really actually as important as something like a carbon tax, perhaps even more important. Because if we can get the first one built, the one that nobody's ever sure is going to work or is economic, right? Then you know you can replicate. Once you build the first one, you can replicate.
All right, so circling back to where I began with this, though, could this happen without any of the things we just talked about? Or do we just need to get on board with this idea that carbon is a problem, we tax bad things one way or another, and this is something that needs to be done?
So first of all, the answer is yes. We would see a lot more solutions if we had more incentives, et cetera. We've been very fortunate because we were able to leverage, for example, Department of Energy funding to help us scale. We also were able to go to China, where there was a big motivation to try to scale technology. So we found a way. What you're talking about would make it easier and would shorten the cycle time. And because we're in a hurry, we have a climate crisis, last time I checked, we need to go faster and faster. And so the things you're talking about would help people like us go faster.
So let's talk about some of the other products that we take for granted and don't necessarily associate with carbon or climate change that you're involved in. It's not just aviation fuel. That's That's kind of low-hanging or high-hanging, depending on which way you look at it, right? So what about some of the other things you're thinking about at Lanzatech?
Well, actually, we've just made 1,500 tons, so commercial scale quantities of PET. PET is used to make bottles and to make polyester. So hopefully the second half of this year, your stores will have clothing made from recycled carbon emissions. So look for that. And then the other thing that we just introduced yesterday, Unilever is now using a detergent made using our recycled carbon emissions. So now in China, you can clean your floors and do your laundry using what would have been pollution. So
that's exciting stuff, yes. So ultimately, though, what you have here is carbon neutral. In other words, you're taking fresh carbon and reusing it. But if the carbon originally burned, whether it's the coal in that steel mill or whatever, is old dinosaur carbon, we still have a problem. So we still have to tackle the renewable side of this somehow. Do you see ultimately this being fully cyclical and zero carbon once it scales up?
One, there's two ways to get to zero carbon. One is exactly what you just said, making it fully cyclical. The other is finding different ways to substitute for that coal. So I'll give you an example. In the project in Belgium that we're building, 90% of what goes into the blast furnace is coal, 10% is torrefied bee waste wood. So what's bee waste wood? That's construction demolition waste, okay? So they're turning it into biocoal, they call it. So they have a process that turns it into little pellets and densifies it so it looks like coal, and they dump it into the blast furnace, or they're going to dump it into the blast furnace. So there's innovation in every aspect to eventually drive fossil carbon out of the system. And I would tell you, with great certainty, that we can drive carbon out of the system, fossil carbon. There's plenty of carbon above ground that we can reuse. We leave the other stuff in the ground. And it isn't just a carbon problem. Drilling in the Arctic is also bad for other reasons, biodiversity, our ecosystem. So we just have to get off this carbon diet we're on and get on a different carbon diet.
So I could use a diet myself after all this COVID stuff, but that's another subject. There's some carbon in there, I'm sure, but let's talk about what it's like being an entrepreneur in this space. This is not Instagram. This is hard work where you have to build real things that are very expensive. You've raised, what is it,
500, almost 500 now.
500 million.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds good, but you probably need more to get where you want to go. Explain the challenges of taking this to VCs and having them sign on.
Yeah, so, you know, I told you we call it crossing the valley of death. My husband actually calls it crossing the Grand Canyon of death. So, you know, it is hard to go to VCs with something where your business plan is 15 years and their fund is 10 years, right? But you saw Carmichael on the screen. He's got a fund that's I think it's a 20-year fund. So they're prepared to invest in technologies that will take longer to get to scale. And so it's starting to turn. People are realizing that we have to do things differently. But what we've had to do, if you look at our investors, they're global. So it's not your traditional VCs in California or Boston. We have a lot of strategic investors. Indian Oil, Suncor, BASF. These are people who've invested in us because they believe, once they believed if the technology is successful, it'd be great. Now they believe it will be successful, and they're all building plants. Indian Oil is building a plant, et cetera. So what you're seeing is the use and leverage of a strategic investor to be able to build $100 million facilities.
Well, nothing succeeds like success, right? So we only have a few minutes left. If there's audience questions, make your way to the microphone, and we'll be sure to include you in the conversation. Jennifer, a little bit about you personally. You grew up in Colombia. This story about you being worried about the coffee crop kind of resonates with me. Was that Was that kind of a moment for you where it changed your career and your thoughts about what you wanted to do in the world?
Yeah, that really did make a difference because I think, as I told you, I was focused on energy democracy. And I realized that energy democracy wasn't good enough. Giving everybody energy that's polluting energy and then their homes are going to get flooded, that doesn't help. And so I realized what we needed was clean energy democracy. And what I realized also is that we're always presented with false choices. Well, no, these people need energy. Yeah, sure they do, but why can't we give them the right energy? And that's how we have to think. How do we do the right things? And stop telling ourselves that something different, because it's different, can't happen. And frankly, Edison stopped at nothing, right? I mean, look at the number of patents in so many areas. And you know, I'm sure everybody told him what a stupid idea A, B, or C were. And he failed, and he claimed he failed many times, but it doesn't matter. What matters is we just keep moving,
So that idea that what separates the likes of you from people who might walk along the street and have a brief momentary idea and then go on with their daily lives, what is it that leads you to that point, that makes you so driven, so specific, so focused on a goal? Can you analyze that at all?
As my father said, he'd never met anybody more stubborn.
Stubborn counts, yeah.
Yeah.
Edison certainly was stubborn.
Yeah. We're all bullheaded. We have a team of very bullheaded people. Nothing stops us.
What do you tell to the young people here and who are watching on the stream about ideas, innovation, pursuing ideas and careers that might change the world?
You know, the guy sitting on the couch doing nothing can always tell you that what you're doing is stupid and worthless. It's the guy doing the hard work that matters. And so, you know, I always used to say, when somebody tells you something won't work, just be like the Madagascar penguins, you know, just smile and wave. You don't have to fight every battle. You just keep on doing. And when it works, they'll shut up. In fact, it'll be their idea.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, you entrepreneurs, innovators, visionaries like yourself are sort of by definition optimists. As you slog through, you know, this is, as I said in that piece, it's not an overnight thing. You guys have been working at this for a long time. Sean, initially, you coming in, you guys have been at this for a long time. And it's still, you're still not quite there yet. How do you remain focused, optimistic on achieving this goal? Because it is, what you're after is so important to all of us.
I think, you know, it's funny. You always have to think 10 years ahead, and then you have all these little threads that sort of come together, and every day you make progress on something, and then there's the next day and the next day, and then 10 years later or 15 years later, you know what? There's apparel made from recycled carbon.
Must give you quite a degree of pride when you get to that point.
Oh, yeah, hell yeah.
So what's next for Lanzatech? What do you see happening in the coming years?
Well, we want to build plants everywhere. We want to show the world that pretty much every bit of carbon can be reused. We want to show the world that everything we use in our daily lives, in our homes, in our cars, in our planes, can come from recycled carbon. But more importantly, what we want to show is other people that there is another way. And if there is another way, they will all try their ideas. And, you know, maybe 20 years from now, Lanzatech won't be around. But there'll be hundreds of other companies that were born because we showed them it was possible. That's the goal.
That's a big goal. That's a very altruistic goal. Is that what it's all about for you guys?
No. You got to return funding to our investors. So, so we're going to make money doing this. And that's the other thing we're going to show is that sustainability can create value instead of just destroying value, which is what some people think.
So there is a way to have it all.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, I'm going to end it at that because it doesn't get better than that. Jennifer Holmgren of Lanzatech, our Edison Award achievement winner for this year. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you, Sean, as well. The Edison Awards will continue. We're not quite done yet. Up next, you're going to meet a man who is a pioneer in implements that allow orthopedic surgeons to do their jobs and all of us to live better, more mobile, more healthy lives. So stay with us as the Edison Awards Meet the Innovators Forum continues. 5-minute break.